Hail thee well and welcome all. I'm the Jake of all trades, and this is episode 6 of my Avatar campaign journal series. On our last episode, the players were in the village of La Ming, and there they dealt with some spirit attacks that were plaguing the city every week, and they found an abandoned temple to this spirit, and there they defeated some porcupines that had taken up residence, and they had found a hidden room in this temple where they found some loots, and they also figured out what was causing the attacks, and they fixed it, and now the village will hopefully be safe in the future. After celebrating for a bit with the village, the party then recuperated that night, flew towards Hun'Ro the next morning. Hun'Ro was a few days away, however, and they had the option of, hey, maybe we just camp in the wilderness, or wait, we see some smoke coming up over the horizon here. I wanted to create a cool situation, a cool scenario where Sindal and Fang had to cooperate with each other. And this is because I was approached by Sindal's player after one of our games, and he asked me, like, hey, I really want to try to find a place with this party, and I want my character to fit in with everybody, but I want it to feel earned. I want it to be part of the story. I want there to be something, you know, that drives this personal connection that he makes with the party. And I was like, you know what, that sounds completely reasonable, especially for the character you're playing. And I started thinking about how I could create a situation in which Fang and Sindal specifically had to cooperate with each other. The player felt that his character was just not cooperating, specifically with Fang very well. The Earthbender and Firebender personalities, they just clashed a little more often than they coincided, I guess. The encounter that I prepared for this session is also going to be the first example of what I have called unique encounters. Unique encounters are encounters that do not fit the typical constraints of a normal fight, in which you have this many people and you are fighting against them and you need to defeat them all. Typically, generally, it's just like I add an extra constraint or two on that scenario. And a lot of times it's something like, oh man, there's like, yes, you need to defeat all these people, but there's also like a caster, you know, 40 feet back, who is casting a spell that is going to pretty much end this scenario. So your main objective is to take out that guy somehow. You need to work your way through all of these other minions to get there, but the main objective is defeating something else. Something time-related, specifically, is how I generally run it. And I'm going to be going into more depth about how I do this on my next Dungeon Master Masterclass video. I'm going to be talking about these unique encounters and how you can set them up in your own game so that you can take advantage of this interesting tool to spice up combat and make it a little more interesting and a little less mundane. So, the party is flying towards the village of Hun'Ro, but, as I mentioned, on the way there they see a plume of smoke coming up over the horizon. Actually, it's coming up from behind one of the large mountains that creates this valley that La Ming sits at the bottom of. It's one of the mountains near the top of this valley, though, speaking north. And you'll see the picture over here by what I mean by that, and exactly where this mountain is. And as they come around a little further, they're keeping a wide berth. They don't know what this is, but they want to keep an eye on it because they're interested. As they come around the side of it, they see that there is lava pouring down the side of this mountain. And in addition to that, it is also threatening to engulf a small village that is sitting at the very base of this mountain. It appears that the villagers are trying to resist this as best they can, but at the moment, that lava is just booking it down the hill. And all those people are, you know, maybe not in danger of being engulfed in flames, but having their entire home destroyed. So, the party, after a brief discussion, decides that they want to try to help these guys. They don't want to fly past. They think that they might be able to do something to help them. And that is what I was hoping. So, the party lands at the edge of this village, and they see that the village is fairly small, and it's also pretty much composed entirely of, like, wood and thatch and stuff like that. Very, very flimsy, flammable material. And they also notice that a lot of the villagers are struggling to fight the fire, as I mentioned before. They see that earthbenders, there's a lot of earthbenders, that's the primary composition of the village, are near the top of the village between the mountain and them, trying to create a large earthen pit to stop this lava flow, essentially. It's something to try to break it. And there's also a bucket brigade that is being spearheaded by two waterbenders, it appears, by their robes and by their water bending. they're pulling water out of this well and like putting it into buckets that are being sent down this line where most of the non-bending villagers are participating as a person who's handing a bucket from one person to another. And in addition to that, there are a couple airbenders and several firebenders who are also near the fire pit, and they are working to stem the flow of this lava. The firebenders are trying to extinguish the flame, and the airbenders are trying to use their air blasts to like buffet it with wind and rapidly cool the lava to harden it and slow it down in its place. So now our party jumps into action, and this is when I laid down the ground rules for my unique encounters. That is an important thing to do anytime you try to use one of these encounters, is that you lay down the specific rules for the encounter. What are the parameters? What do they need to avoid happening to lose? Because if they lose the game, if this happens, what do they need to accomplish so that they can win the game, essentially? And that's kind of how I build it, like a little miniature, maybe war game kind of is an idea. But like I said, I impose certain rules and restrictions, and in this encounter, the rules were that the lava moves 5 feet every 2 rounds. I wanted to take it kind of easy. I wasn't sure how this would work. I had never heard about this before. I had never attempted this before, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't throw something at my players that they had no chance of overcoming. So I kept it pretty gentle. I said that it was a pretty slow incline once it came off the mountain, and it leveled out a little bit, and it slowed down, so it was only moving about 5 feet every 2 rounds. As the lava would grow closer after rounds, I would draw it getting closer on the battle map that we were using, and any patches that they hit with enough damage would freeze, essentially. They would harden over. They would solidify into rock. And they could pretty much, the Fang could use his fire blasts or his fire bending to try to extinguish the flames. Pema could use her air blasts to try to buffet it with wind again to harden it, or Tiki could use her water to try to throw her water over it to just rapidly cool it, instantly hard it, sort of. And so that's kind of what they were focusing on. I told them that if they could freeze the entire front line, essentially, that they would have kind of fixed it. They would have saved the day. They wouldn't have to worry about the village being engulfed in flames. So they broke out and they started doing their own things. Tiki went over to the waterbenders. She was pretty excited to see a few waterbenders and to have the opportunity to cooperate with them. And so she instantly, coordinating with them, formed essentially her own second bucketless brigade, in which they were pulling up water and passing it to her, and then she would then take that water and then throw it onto the lava. And the party moved up into melee range with this fire as it was happening, so that they could get a better shot on this stuff, stay closer to the action. Fang began helping out the earthbenders, essentially taking over for them. Because he was a much higher level earthbender than they were. They were like level 1 or 2 maybe, and he was like level 5 or 6 at this point. And so he was able to just like take that earth and completely just shovel it out at an astounding rate. It only took him about 4 or 5 rounds maybe to dig up all of the earth that he needed to create a fire line around the edges of the village. Meanwhile, Sindal and Pema were also near that fire line, and they were using their bending to try to harden this lava, to help their other benders to harden this lava in place so that they could save this village from being completely razed to the ground. After several rounds of this continued effort, the party finally manages to freeze all of the front sections of this lava and to essentially stop its flow. And I don't even think any of the huts were completely destroyed. I think the fire had begun to singe the edges of one of the huts, and it hadn't even reached the fire line that Fang had dug out. And so that was really good news. That was a little lesson on my part. I was like, oh, hey, I guess I could have sped that lava up and maybe made it go 5 feet every round, and that would have been a little more intimidating, a little more dangerous. But those are notes for the future. Meanwhile, in the present, they are all busy enjoying, their success. They had saved the day. They stopped the lava. But I thought it was too easy, and so I decided that I wanted something else to happen then. No, I'm just playing with you. I planned this ahead of time, actually. This is the actual situation that I wanted Sindal and Fang to have to cooperate with each other to solve. I wanted this to be that sort of defining moment. And so, while everyone thinks that they're safe, Pema is looking up at the volcano, and she sees the side of it suddenly just explode out. And then suddenly everyone hears it explode out, this large, rumbling, crashing sound that, although they can tell it's coming from a long ways off, it sounds incredibly loud still. And everyone can tell where it's coming from. They look up at the volcano, and they see that there has been a second eruption, and lava has begun to flow anew from this volcano. There's not a moment to lose. The party has to act quick. Everyone hops on Popo's back, and they begin flying up to the volcano. And now I'm going to tell you guys something that Fang and Sindal didn't know at the time. In fact, I don't think that they have known it. I don't think I've told them this. If they're watching this video, it should be the first time they hear this information. Hey guys. Anyway, what I did before this session happened, I had shown up with my girlfriend, and I took her aside before we all sat down and we were getting ready to play, and I was just like, hey, I'm going to be trying to do something with Sindal and Fang this session where I want them to use their cooperative bending. I want Sindal to use his fire bending and Fang to use his earth bending, and I want them to use it together. And I felt like cooperative bending was the best way to do this. If they were both using their bending to try to stem this lava flow, then that could be a really cool joint effort. And so, knowing my players, I thought, hey, you know, I might need someone on the inside to help me prompt this scenario. And so I told my girlfriend, like, hey, when it comes time, you'll probably know when. Just try to nudge Fang and Sindal up onto the mountain and try to get them to use their bending to try to block this lava flow just with the two of them. And she was like, oh, okay. You know, she kind of saw where I was going with it, and she went along with it. And honestly, I don't think it could have gone off better. I don't think anyone had any idea at the table that me and my girlfriend were conspiring with each other to create this second situation, essentially. The first part was for the whole party. The second part was for Fang and Sindal specifically. And so, she manages to communicate to them, like, hey, I think you guys may need to use your cooperative bending to solve this. You may need to use both of your bending to try to pull that lava back and try to, like, plug it up maybe and just, like, stop that lava flow. And they were, like, at the table, they were like, oh, man, I don't know, like, maybe that could work. Could that work? And they started to think about it, and they're like, that's not actually a bad idea. And I was just like, hey, I mean, that could actually work. You know, just playing it like, just play it straight face, you know? Like, I didn't have any idea. Oh, yeah, no, that actually sounds like a really good idea. You guys could probably pull that off if you rolled well enough. Just a quick disclaimer. I think this is an excellent tool to add to your GM box. Every once in a while, if you think that you need a little help from the players, it's okay to get a little help from them. My disclaimer is that I don't want you to use this very often. You should use this incredibly sparingly. Do not overuse this. And the reason I say this is because the more you rely on your players to do that work for you, it destroys their verisimilitude. It destroys their perception of the world, and it kind of breaks their game for them a little bit. They start to see the wheels clicking behind the screen and get an idea of how it works, and it can potentially ruin the game for those players. And so I would suggest that if you're going to do it, you do it incredibly sparingly. You only give the players the information that they absolutely need, and maybe you include some kind of like a key sign or like a code word or something like that. Something that you can use to display to the player when you're like, okay, now's the time that you say that thing that I wanted you to bring up. You know, and it can be very useful though if you use it sparingly and you don't give them too much information. I think that it's an excellent tool that can be taken advantage of. But just be very, very cautious because, as I said, you can very quickly destroy a player's perception of the game world and ruin their experience without even intending to. While trying to make it fun for everyone, you ruin it for a certain player. So that is why I would also suggest maybe spreading it out a bit or gauging your players and deciding which ones would be able to use this information the best. Who are the ones you can trust not to metagame and to be very subtle about it, to not be blatant and obvious and conspicuous. So the party finds a place on the mountain where they can quickly kind of land-ish with Popo. And Pema was cautious to get this close to the fire with Popo because Popo is afraid of fire. That was actually in Popo's backstory. She wanted to have some tie to her air bison. And so in her backstory, she wrote that she saved Popo from poachers when she and Popo were both very young. And that is how they formed a bond. But as a result of that experience, Popo has some scarring on his body, and he is also incredibly afraid of fire. Similar to like how Appa was trained in that one episode of Avatar, at the circus or whatever with the firebenders and stuff, and perhaps he developed a fear of fire in that situation. Well, the poachers who were fighting against or trying to imprison Popo and sell him, I suppose, they were firebenders, and that is where Popo developed his fear of fire. And so he is hesitant to get close to the flames, but Pema rolls well on her handle animal check. Sorry, I get excited and the words just tumble out of my mouth faster than I can enunciate them. Pema rolls high enough, and she manages to land Popo on a sort of levelish spot, and Fang and Sindal are able to jump down and try to use some cooperative bending to stem the flow of this lava break. And they run up there and get into a good range, and they begin to use their bending, and they kind of knocked it out of the park. I had written up some rules on how to do the cooperative bending, and kind of just quickly, because I was like, I need to have some mechanics for how this works. If they're going to do it, I need to have some idea of how it works. Well, I didn't really need an idea, because they both, I don't think either of them rolled below a 15. I think it was like a 16 and an 18 on the die. That's plus their bonuses. And so they were able, I was like, oh man, yeah, that's no problem. You guys are just like, whoomp, and like pull it back, and then you just both like concentrate, and you are able to harden this large section of lava that you have pulled back and plugged into the hole that exploded out. And again, I was like, man, that was way too easy. I need to have something in here. I need to have some kind of an actual challenge, something life-threatening, something dangerous. Something needs to happen to create a little tension, because this whole time I've been trying to create this tension, and every time I've been trying to create it, my players are just like, are completely stomping my expectations of what is going to happen. They are just like walking all over it, essentially. And so I'm like, man, I need to have that tension, otherwise they're not gonna feel good about it, or at least I'm not gonna feel good about it, honestly. I think they were all having a good fun time, but I feel like I needed that tension, and so when they plugged up the hole, I said that gas suddenly began venting out of sections of the earth around them, and they were in danger of being enveloped by this noxious, poisonous gas that was essentially being created by the pressure that they had created by plugging this second hole. Before I forget, they had done so well on their bending checks to create this cap to stem the lava that Sindal was like, hey, I want to go an extra step. I want to just carve an initial on that thing that we just made using my firebending. I want to try to mold some of the lava to form like an embossed letter. And I was like, oh, you want to make like a giant C on there? And everyone kind of laughed a little bit. They're like, oh yeah, nice, like in the ultimate form of graffiti, right? And he was like, no, actually, I want to make a giant P for Avatar Fang, because it was Avatar Fang. It's Avatar Fang. He's the new Avatar, and he was trying to give Fang the credit, I think. And he was like, I think Fang was the one who did most of the work here, and I think he's the one that deserves to have his initial emblazoned on the side of this volcano. And so he created, with his lava bending, a giant P, which is probably still present. Which, I mean, it also works, because the name of the village was Pin Yao. And so, hey, maybe everyone thinks the P is for Pin Yao, but Fang and Sindal and Team Avatar all know that it stands for Fang. But back to that tension that I was trying to build. Gas suddenly began sprouting out of the ground around them, potentially threatening to envelop them in this noxious cloud of gas, and who knows what that stuff will do. And I'm pretty sure that Fang was, he rolled incredibly well on his reflex save. Either that, or he was like, as I was trying to describe this, he rolled like a 25 on an acrobatics check to jump up into Popo's saddle, to be like, okay, I think we're done here, we can leave now. And so I was like, oh man, he get affected by the gas. But I had started speaking before Sindal had been able to react, and so I was like, oh, no, Sindal's just got caught in the gas vapors. He was too busy, tagging the volcano, and so now he has to deal with this volcano gas, and I think he rolled decent on his check, but I decided he didn't roll well enough, and suddenly he began to feel woozy, and he blacked out and hit the ground. He essentially blacked out for a round or two, and this is where I looked at Fang, and I was like, okay, buddy, there's no one else here. Pema's at the reins, and Tiki, I think, might be at the village, and it's just you and Sindal, and what are you gonna do? And, he gave, I'm pretty sure he rolled his eyes and kind of sighed a little bit, and he's like, alright. I jump off of Popo's back, and I go and run back for Sindal, and I was like, alright, you need to make, an acrobatics check to try to dodge these vents, or and then you get to him, you try to bring him up, make a reflex save to avoid another gas vent, and he succeeds his reflex save. He doesn't pass out. He manages to kind of bring Sindal back to consciousness, and they both run back to Popo, the air bison. Fang helps him. I think he might even have just tried to quickly throw him. Being an earthbender, being pretty strong, I think he just tried to throw Sindal up as far as he could. And I think he got him up a few feet or so, not all the way into the saddle, but then Sindal had to quickly try to grab onto the fur and try to, make his way back over the saddle and just to save himself. And Fang managed to climb up, and as, Pema was lashing the reins, yeah, let's get out of here, yip, yip. Get out of this stuff. And Popo was all too eager to comply, I'm sure. At this point, he was freaking out quite a bit from all of the lava and gas and stuff, and it was just not a good time for him. So, the party makes it out, and they make it back to the village. The day is saved, and I'm pretty sure that I was still trying to create that tension, because I decided that I wanted to plant another... I wanted to drop another little hook in front of my players, specifically Tiki. I dropped a nice little baited hook, a nice fat, juicy worm in front of her, and even though they had just had this nice big meal, I think she decided, you know what, just one more bite. I'll see what you have to say. And I told her, you know what, first I think we need to talk about Tiki's backstory. First thing you need to know about Tiki, she was out on a coming-of-age vision quest sort of ordeal trial thing for her village when she came of age. I think she was turning 16 when she went out on this, and she was out for several days. When she came back to her village, the entire village was in ruin. Everyone had been slaughtered. There was no one left alive. And that was when she left the Southern Water Tribe, and she began traveling north. I believe she was maybe trying to make her way to her sister tribe in the north. And along the way, she was also searching for potential clues as to who murdered her family. Well, I finally took one of those elements of her backstory, and I decided to play with it a little bit. I was like, you know what? You recognize those waterbenders that were actually working with you earlier today. You were kind of busy and distracted fighting the lava at the time, but now you realize that they are wearing Southern Water Tribe robes. Specifically, it looks like they might be tribes that come from, or the robes that come from your specific tribe. These are people who you think might have been, who lived in your village before your village was murdered. Sufficiently excited at the idea of hunting down her family/village's murderers, Tiki is, her eyes light up, and she's like, oh, what? What happened? What do they know? They're like, okay, well, you go over and you talk to them, and they're like, whoa, and you're like, what happened? What happened? What do you know? What happened? Like, what's going on? Who killed everyone? And they're like, all right, here's what we can tell you. We're a couple. We made it out of the Southern Water Tribe village as it was being attacked by it was the village of Alton, by the way. The name of her village is Alton. So we were escaping the village of Alton as it was being attacked by a band of Earth Kingdom raiders. And these were the Sea Griffins, specifically, is what they tell her. And this was kind of a shout-out to that episode of Avatar in Season 3 when Katara and Zuko hunt down the Western Raiders, or the Southern Raiders, sorry, the Southern Raiders. I decided it was kind of like that, but no, they're not the Southern, they're the Sea Griffins instead, but that's kind of their same shtick. And so, she now has a name to put to the crime, essentially. And she gets pretty excited by this. I may do a video about this later, a Dungeon Master video, about incorporating your players' backstories into your story, your plot. But that's just a maybe. I feel like there's also pretty decent videos out there already, and I also feel like that's kind of more of an art than a science. Like, if you feel it, if you feel like, hey, that kind of sounds like this, or that sounds similar to this, you might want to think about how you could try to work those in. My main advice would be just not to shoehorn it in. That's the most important thing, is not to shoehorn stuff like that in. You want to be gentle, and you want to delicately ease it in. Take your time. Don't be rushed with it. But that's like I said, that's for a different video. In this video, I can say that that's about it for the players. They went back to the village, they enjoyed a nice feast, and all of the villagers were just like, oh my gosh, we don't know what you do without you. We would be like sleeping out there in the forest or something. It would be awful, and we have you guys to thank for it. In the meantime, they all enjoy themselves. Fang is practicing with his bending a little bit, his newfound avatar abilities, and he's kind of practicing with like water bending and air bending and stuff like that. He's trying his hand at it. And one of the locals catches him. He sees him doing it. He's like, hey, are you the Avatar by any chance? And he's like, oh, no, I'm not at all. Why would you say that? And the guy's like, no reason. I just thought maybe, and wanders off, and Fang can tell that the guy's still watching him, and later on in the party, he plays with his bending a little bit more just to freak the guy out. Fang didn't know that I was going to poll on that in my next session. So there's something to keep you guys listening, maybe. I don't know if you're interested or not. Yeah, the next session I can also say that the players make it to the village of Hun'Ro, finally. And they are able to finally complete their quest. They're able to figure out who the Avatar is, or rather, who the Avatar impersonator is. Anyway, that's all I have for this episode. I thank you all so much for listening, and I certainly hope that I'm going to see you again very soon.